Grief is such a personal thing. And a fascinating new study is really challenging how we think about it, especially when it comes to pregnancy loss. It suggests that grief isn't just one single experience, but a whole spectrum that's shaped by our individual circumstances. So let's dive in and see what the researchers uncovered.
And this is really the central question they wanted to tackle. Is all grief created equal? They wanted to see if the context behind a pregnancy loss, the how and the why, actually changes the kind of grief that follows.
So to figure this out, they surveyed almost 2,000 American women in their early 40s. And get this, it was a topic blind survey, which means the women participating had no idea it was about pregnancy loss. That's super important for getting honest answers. The study then zeroed in on two main groups: women who'd had a natural loss, like a miscarriage, and women who'd had an induced abortion, to look for patterns in their emotional responses over the long haul. And that brings us to their first huge discovery. The study found that when it comes to abortion, the circumstances around that decision are a massive factor in predicting how intense the grief might be, sometimes even decades down the road. Okay, so to really get a handle on this, the researchers sorted these experiences into 4 different buckets based on how the woman felt. Was the decision wanted, meaning it aligned with her own values? Was it inconsistent, where she accepted it, but it kind of clashed with her beliefs? Or was it unwanted, or even coerced, where she felt she was basically forced into it against her will? And right here, the numbers tell a really powerful story. For women who said their abortion was wanted, about 14% were at high risk for what's called complicated grief. That's a really intense, persistent kind of grieving. Now, that risk takes up for inconsistent and unwanted decisions. But just look at that last category. For women who felt coerced, the risk just skyrockets to over 53%. When you put the lowest and highest risk groups right next to each other like this, it just hits you. The emotional difference between a decision that feels free and a decision that feels forced is just enormous, and it clearly has lasting effects. To put that another way, the research found a woman who felt coerced was over 7 times more likely to struggle with this intense, complicated grief than a woman whose decision felt right for her. I mean, that is a staggering difference. So you might be wondering, where does a natural pregnancy loss, like a miscarriage, fit into all of this? Well, the study found its grief intensity lined up most closely with an unwanted abortion, a decision that, even if she made it, went against what she really wanted. Okay, so we've seen the what, we see these different levels of grief, but what about the why? What's really going on under the surface that drives the most intense and lasting grief? The researchers looked at so many different factors: pressure from others, how much the pregnancy was wanted, past losses, and yeah, all those things mattered. But the single biggest predictor of who would grieve the most severely, well, it wasn't an external thing at all. It came from the inside. Across every single group they looked at, the most powerful and consistent predictor was self-judgment. So what do they even mean by self-judgment? It's that inner critic, right? It's those heavy internal feelings of guilt, of shame, or that deep-seated belief that you're somehow a bad person because of what happened. According to this research, it's that internal story we tell ourselves that fuels the toughest grief. Now, self-judgment was the big one for sure, but it wasn't the only thing. The study also found that feeling more pressure, wanting the pregnancy more, and having a history of more pregnancy losses were all linked to higher levels of grief. And this brings us to a part of the study that is, wow, it's really sobering. We're talking about the long-term impact. The pain from these losses isn't always something that just fades away. For a lot of women, it's something they carry for decades. The researchers asked a simple question: when were the negative feelings at their absolute worst? And the answer from a shocking 40% of women was that the worst of their negative feelings are happening right now. They're still persisting even today. And you have to remember the context here. The women in this study were in their early 40s. That means, on average, these feelings have been going on for 20 years. This isn't just grief from last year. This is a profound, long-term reality for them. So what does that actually look like day to day? Well, the study linked it to things like intrusive thoughts, nightmares, or flashbacks about the loss. And it found that these persistent feelings often get in the way of daily life, affecting work, relationships, and just a person's overall sense of well-being. So, why does all of this research matter so much? What's the big takeaway? Well, it's because understanding these different shades of grief isn't just some academic thing. This data points to real, tangible ways we can improve how we care for women going through this. Based on everything they found, the researchers laid out some really clear recommendations. First, healthcare providers should screen for pressure and coercion before an abortion, since we know it's tied to such negative outcomes. Second, mental health professionals should make it a routine practice to gently ask about pregnancy loss history. And finally, we should be offering resources that can help women avoid finding themselves in a position where they have to make an unwanted choice in the first place. Ultimately, what this research does is move us past a simple, one-size-fits-all view of pregnancy loss. It points the way to a more compassionate, evidence-based approach. And it leaves us with a really important question. Now that we have a better map of these different degrees of grief, how do we build systems of care that can truly meet people wherever they are on that map?